Today, my guest is someone who has operated at the highest levels of global supply chain leadership, Rick McDonald. He is the former chief supply chain officer of the Clorox Company, where he led global operations for a 7 billion plus consumer products company through some of the most turbulent operating environments in modern supply chain history. From the COVID demand shock to hyperinflation and even a major cyber disruption, Rick led one of the most critical supply chain networks in the world, delivering essential disinfecting products when the world needed them most. Today, Rick advises founders, CEOs, and boards across the supply chain technology ecosystem, helping bridge the gap between operators building real-world systems and innovators building the next generation of supply chain technology. Rick, welcome to the Momentum Flow.
Hey, Luis, it is great to see you again. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm humbled you joined and looking forward to have a good conversation here. So, to our audience, I've been lucky to spend a good amount of time with Rick in recent times. I now know he's very vocal about something that many companies are just starting to realize, which is talent and technology must evolve together. Today, we'll explore how AI is transforming supply chains from execution engines into decision platforms, requiring leaders to rethink skills, operating models, and leadership structures. However, before we jump into our conversation, Rick, please share your personal story from your early days in Frito-Lay, your successful career in Clorox, and now your focus in supply chain advisory and board membership.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. Grew up in Atlanta originally, went to Georgia Tech, played a little baseball there. When I figured out I couldn't hit that kind of pitching, I had to go get a real job. And so I went to Frito-Lay and spent 10 great years there. I joined the Clorox Company when it was $1.7 billion dollars. And of course, today it's a little bit over $7 billion, dollars, not counting the recent acquisition of Gojo Purell.
Yeah.
But what excites me about what I'm doing right now is I'm getting to work with some really fun people on fun projects, smart people who are really leading the way in this, in this massive pivot we're all going through with supply chain technology
Mhm.
and the elevation of AI and agents and all that that entails with respect to the intersection of talent and technology. So it's a very interesting time for those of us who are in the middle of the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Fun times, no doubt about it. So now you led Clorox supply chain in one of the most extraordinarily difficult and demanding demand shocks in many consumer goods history. So looking back, what did that moment reveal to you about the role of supply chain and supply chain leadership inside the company?
Yeah, I think we all began to realize that supply chain deserved a full seat at the table if it didn't have one already. The importance of a company's supply chain in many cases, it spelled the difference between success and failure. And so for me at Clorox, I had a great team working with me. My leadership team and those below them were exceptional at what they did, and so it allowed us to operate probably about as well as we could. We'd already developed a great culture, kind of a think it, say it, don't hold anything back type culture. And that proved especially valuable as we got into all the uncertainties of COVID and hyperinflation and then the cyber attack.
Now, you simplified the mission during COVID to two priorities, right? First, protect your people, and second, run plants and disease full flat out. Now, that clarity help you focus on lock your organization? Did it, or was it was a difficult time? So, what's your perspective?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I'll tell you a downside in just a second here, but the upside and the immediacy of what we had to do was right in front of us. We were designated an essential business for obvious reasons, and we had to run our plants. And we had to keep our people safe and healthy. And so those two objectives really clarified what we were going to be about. It didn't mean that we weren't interested in productivity or safety or quality or anything else, but the focus on safety and health in our facilities, operating safely with extended hours, and making sure people were healthy when they came to work. That was job number one. I'm very proud to say we had no transmittable cases of COVID in any of our factories during that time period, and
Wow.
that's a tribute to the plant leaders and all of our folks in our plants. They're the real heroes in this story.
So now, if it wasn't enough, right? You also navigated hyperinflation during your tenure and later major cyber disruption. So what did those experiences teach you about organizational resiliency that technology alone cannot survive it, right?
Yeah, well, the resiliency part of it, what we learned during COVID was we did not have to have perfect information to make a lot of important decisions quickly.
Okay.
And in fact, we were almost better off if we didn't overanalyze because we were possibly going to get gridlocked in our own, in our own brains and our own thoughts. And so making decisions quickly, checking back in to see if they were working, and then changing course if we had to was a really important thing. It also taught us more about the value of redundancy in the supply chain. I call them insurance policies. You
Hmm.
can't insure everything, but you can make certain some of your critical ingredients and key suppliers have the right amount of capacity. Because clearly, at the start of COVID, we didn't on a very important item to consumers around the world, like Clorox disinfecting wipes. We changed that very quickly within the year by going out in a worldwide sourcing effort, and came back with really almost double our supply. Not only through that, but also adding a new packaging line in our existing plant while we were in the middle of COVID. But all those things taught us about the redundancy of supply and the things that we needed to have to be ready for the next disruption.
Now, I remember in a recent conversation, you made a point that it sounded very powerful to me, right? Resilience is not just getting inventory or building inventory. Inventory is really an optionality. So you want to elaborate a little bit on that? How does that optionality look in modern supply chains?
Yeah, I think the optionality really is it spans a number of different items. It's all the way from the quality of your demand signal and being able to improve your forecast so you've got a supply plan and inventory goes with that, and you're not just creating inventory that's sitting idle and consuming cash. It goes with understanding what your suppliers' capabilities are, what the ecosystem of their tier ones and or tier twos and tier threes, how they're operating, and really how it gives you choices that you can make when disruptions occur. To me, that's the difference between resiliency and agility. Resilience is what you do before the disruption. Agility is how fast can you respond from the shock of the disruption and whatever it is that's taking you off track.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction, right? Building resiliency to gain agility. So fully echo that. Now, you're also an advisor now, and you spend most of the time in advisory. Is a little different, right? So, what talent capabilities or leadership behaviors separate the organization that adapt quickly from those that struggle during crisis?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm really enjoying this chapter in my career. It's been very fulfilling. As I said on the at the beginning, it's fun things with fun people, but it's also meaningful things where outcomes matter a lot, and their ability to transform organizations through their technology is fantastic. What I find is in the case of a lot of organizations, the digital literacy, I call it digital fluency, but the executives level to really ability to really understand the landscape that we're living in, all of the digital capabilities that exist, and what problems they're best at solving, that is not nearly sufficient. And that might sound like harsh criticism, but I think it is actually based in reality. And part of the reason why so many digital transformations are failing, either the wrong problem was picked and they didn't understand the business case behind that problem, or somebody got sold some technology that really didn't attend to the issue that was trying to be addressed, or change management was off. All those are leadership activities. And I find as organizations come up the curve relative to digital fluency, the better they do with digital transformations.
Yeah, and that's a perfect lead into our next section, right? Because those crises force supply chains to rethink how they operate. At the same time, we're seeing another massive shift happening with AI and digital transformation. And the conversation is starting to move beyond visibility, right? That used to be the theme for years, towards something much more powerful, right? Which is, and maybe a little bit different. So I heard you say in recent times as well that AI is shifting us from dashboards to decisions. And when does that shift look, or how does that shift look inside supply chain operations? When you're
Yeah,
shifting from, yeah,
well, I think it's a massive shift, and really, again, kind of it's a little bit part of the digital fluency, digital literacy conversation because instead of just having visibility, which by the way, not all of us have great visibility to all of
yeah,
our results, even in the dashboard, rear view mirror dashboard, it is really transitioning from visibility to insight. Kind of in the days gone past, we and still for a lot of companies, we had a static group of KPIs. We put the dipstick in once a month, maybe once a week, if we were lucky daily, and calibrate how we did on performance. And now with technology, we don't have to settle for that. We can actually be much more orchestrated and much more about the insights instead of just visibility. And then what that leads us to, given quick insights, is quicker decisions. So we can respond quicker to the data that's available and, sorted, sifted, curated, and presented to us through technology. But then the human beings involved can also make recommendations on what to do with that data. And so the decision parts are really important there. And then, last but not least, that leads to better execution, or at least faster execution. Better is going to be kind of up to the organization involved, but better execution, because decisions that were made manually, there were a lot of debates about, should we, shouldn't we? Leadership teams didn't align. Some organizations require almost everybody to consent to consents before they will move forward. Well, this changes the game here. The automation, the APIs, the orchestration platforms really allow for a much faster execution. Once you have the data, you sort it, you sift it, you gain the insight, you make a decision, and then you execute. All that can happen in a matter of minutes, where, even today in a lot of organizations, that is a, hours long, days long, weeks long type of process.
I hear you loud and clear. So you're definitely saying that, the opportunity now lies in systems that influence operational workflow rather than just reporting on them. And I fully agree. Now, you've also said, on the other hand, that digital transformation without sequencing becomes just digital theater, right? It's just, digital for the sake of being digital.
Yeah.
So what does that right sequencing look like? You from data, workflows, intelligent automation? Elaborate a little bit.
Yeah. This is the go slow to go fast part, Luis.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because, and this is my experience, kind of fumbling around a little bit with what to do digitally at Clorox back in, circa 2018 or so. The company had experienced I'll call it a technology debt for a number of years. And so there were some systems that were either broken or not working or in risk of failing, which would have been, fairly disastrous for the supply chain of the company. So, sorting through all this, it occurred to me that, in order to gain funding for these initiatives, because I'm competing with every other function in the
Yeah,
organization,
yeah, right.
not only monetary funding, but resource people funding to do
Mhm,
the work. I've got to have some sort of a way to talk about the priorities and why
mhm,
those priorities are important. And, long story short is, from a list of problems that we had to solve in the supply chain, which I think every organization ought to have right now, that inventory,
mhm,
we were able to prioritize them based on pushing them through four risk filters: a financial filter, reputational filter, a regulatory filter, and a customer filter. Those inform the size of the problem we were trying to solve. And then we built the business case around, if we solve this problem, what's the value to the organization? And that, it sounds really simple to say, and I think I said that in about 35 seconds. It took us a while to sort that out and figure that out. But more importantly, it was really powerful within the enterprise, because now I could speak to my colleagues on the executive team around the investments that we had to make and why we had to make them, and what I was promising them in return in terms of an ROI that I would immediately take out of my financial forecast. So that was my learning, is the inventory of the problems to solve, pushing them through those risk filters, creating the business case, and the roadmap that will attend to your biggest and most important problems first. Because one last thing, when you buy technology, you're not just buying technology, you're buying down the risk of the problem of the issue that technology can attend to. And so it really is a risk mitigation strategy, as well as in some cases a cost improvement approach, a margin improvement approach.
I definitely love your four risk filters approach. Financial, reputational, regulatory, and consumer. I think that's very sound advice for people. You know, now at the same time as companies are trying to get more digital, a lot of them are running dozens of disconnected pilots across planning or logistics or procurement. So what separates organizations that scale digital transformation from those stuck in just pilot mode? Because as you know, there's a lot that they're just doing pilots left and right.
Yeah. One of the it's a really important question, and I think some of this is born by sort of the FOMO of digital transformations. People they fear they're going to miss out. They hear a lot about AI. They're hearing more about agents. They hear about, well, honestly, a lot more failures than successes right now for some of the reasons
Mhm.
I mentioned before. But they don't want to miss out on something to be great for
Yeah,
their company, for their
yeah,
people, for their shareholders and investors. And so I think this issue of how do you get into that without piloting yourself to death is a really important one. To me, that starts with something that I thought we did pretty well at Clorox, which we had a multifunctional governance team that evaluated the top candidates for digital investment at the company. Now, this was early days. This is why we were getting our let's say getting our hands dirty in terms of figuring this out because we were all learning together, but learning quickly and coming up with the what's and whys of these recommendations that we could stand behind and make investments behind. In some cases, you want to pilot the technology, but
yeah, of course.
you really want to have a thoughtful rollout plan right after that. I wouldn't recommend just piloting and then saying, well, now what do we do? It's got to be in service of something more like hey, if this works, we're rolling XYZ geographies, these businesses, these functions versus we're gonna try it and then we'll kind of get back together and see what happens here. I don't think that's a really effective strategy. I think why you see so many stalls right now is because it's a pilot without purpose and um, not necessarily attending to something that is network wide, system wide, or across functions.
Yeah. So paraphrasing your advice here is, is you need to have an end in mind before just running palos, right? And because you're doing palos with the aim that is going to be successful, you're going to scale it. So how are you going to scale it? That's what I'm learning from you and your advice on how to focus
That's
on.
it, Luis. The other thing I'd say here, and I don't know, you've probably seen this as well. And I don't mean this with any disrespect to boards or board members or executive committees, because I was part of that. Um, but I think sometimes, we get so wrapped up in what is new and shiny and good
Yeah.
that we miss out on some of the other parts. And, maybe somebody on the board says, we got to have AI, you got to have an AI strategy. I don't know. I think you got to have a business strategy, and then you got to determine where artificial intelligence in its various forms could solve the problems you have to solve in your enterprise or in our case, in the supply chain function. Because if the board is putting pressure on the CEO is putting pressure on the organization, somebody's got to go try something someplace. And again, kind of back to the going slow to go fast, you really want to organize yourself up front because when you do these pilots well, when you give these transformations life, it generates trust, it generates
Yeah.
confidence. The next time you show up and say, I've got a great idea and I need a little bit of money and a couple people, you're much more likely to get agreement that is a good place for the company to spend its resources.
Yeah, that's so true. It's a lot of times leadership teams or boards, it's ironic, right? Instead of go slow to go fast, they want to go fast to go fast, and and that sometimes creates a little bit of challenge for the operating side. So I fully echo that. So now pivoting a little bit. With all this technological progress, one thing keeps emerging across the industry, right? So technology is not the biggest constraint anymore. Talent is. So let's talk about how the workforce itself is evolving because there's major shift there as well. So as AI capabilities are maturing, many roles are shifting from just executing tasks to really overseeing automated decision making systems. So do you see supply chain organization evolving towards humans supervising intelligent systems?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And in fact, there's a company I'm advising right now. They do short haul transportation,
Hmm.
and they basically figure out a way to squeeze out all the losses in sort of the dedicated freight environment.
Hmm.
And they have made a massive shift from human talent to digital talent. Agents writing workflows that other agents will execute, but then human beings engaging with the the technology and the capability to provide context, to provide judgment, to provide, in the cases where it's needed, ethics or maybe integrity. And so I do see already a world where organizations are leveraging both human skills and the things that we're good at doing, and the technology and the things that it's good at doing.
So on that same token, so what skills will define the next generation of supply chain leaders? Because the landscape is changing, right?
Yeah, I think when I think about those skills, I'll go back to something I said before, this whole bit around digital fluency. So this is not, what I'm not trying to suggest here is that somebody needs to become a coder in order to be effective.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that you've got to be the one who is flying the drone around and do that kind of at the ground level to be effective as a digital transformation leader. But I do think you have to understand the technology. You have to know which problems, which elements of technology are good at solving and which ones are they not well equipped to solve. You've got to be able to sort and sift through all of the pitches that we are invariably getting in our inboxes at conferences, various webinars and podcasts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where it is everything will solve everything. And there are lots of claims. Some of those are, in fact, valid and true, and others are, maybe well intended, but not quite as effective as. So you got to be able to sort through all that. You got to be able to decide what's the right solution for the problem you're trying to solve at your company. And then I think also, in the human beings involved, back to how the technology is allowing us to arrive at decisions faster. Well, who's the decision orchestrator? Who's the architect of the insights? Who is, working with automation, autonomous planning?
Mhm.
Who are the autonomous planners that are in this world? Who's looking at exceptions? Who's looking at the data and making sure that the data is high quality? Because the thing that I don't think any of us can afford to do now or later is just assume that AI's got it right every single time. There's going to have to be contextual understanding. There's going to have to be some validation for especially important, um, you know, uh, uh, decisions that you can't unwind. So I think those are going to be really important skills as we go here. As it sits on top of that digital fluency, that digital literacy thing, there are going to be new roles created that'll require some different skills.
So a little paraphrasing what I'm hearing you say is, the supply chain leaders and teams will evolve to more setting the guardrails, setting the tonality, validating the reality check, making it more operating proof perspective, right? Not just the theoretical system is doing activity A to Z. And I see you nodding, so I think we agree there. So
And
now,
Luis, let me add one more
uh,
thing, because that's you said it really well there. There's one more thing that I think we're all going to have to get better at. And I've talked about this a lot in various forums, but most of us, me included, aren't great at change management. And we're going through a massive pivot here. It's got its own name. The Internet of Things 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. And this requires some incredible change management skills in terms of eliminating fear within our cohorts, talking about what the changes are going to do and importantly, what they're not going to do, helping people through the change curve. And I don't mean just kind of throwing the change curve up and, doing a day in the life of and calling that good. This is some deeper stuff, because there's a lot of fear out there about what the technology will and won't do for people's employment, people's livelihoods, their families' livelihoods. And this is really a critical thing for us as leaders to attend to, this whole element of change management and how we get people understanding what the technology is going to do. Because I see it as this is going to be talent and technology, not talent or technology. And on the heels of that, I'm keenly aware that some organizations have just announced very large layoffs. I don't know what their size per revenue was to begin with, but you can envision talent and technology being the best way forward here as we move into this more digital landscape.
So talent plus technology with robust change management. That's what I'm hearing you say. So which I fully agree. So So you advise several supply chain technology founders, right? And sometimes, you know, every supply chain founder and entrepreneur is in their DNA to try to showcase the good and the greatest solution they're putting in front of you, right? But do you see a disconnect between technology builders and supply chain operators?
Oh, occasionally that happens, but that's where people like you and me get to drop in and make some suggestions on um, how to frame things, how to provide the right context, how to tell the story, in what order to tell the story. I find in a lot of cases, very smart, very interesting, very good CEOs and supply chain technology founders. They're so excited about what they have developed that they want to tell you the whole story behind that. Meanwhile, you and I and others who are in executive positions, we're sort of wondering what meeting is going to happen in the next half hour that we've got to get to, or what, what, what's going on while we're having this interesting conversation about the story behind the company and so forth. For me, I'm much more of a bottom line up front person. And what I recommend is, talk about your gear. What does it do? Who are you? What are the problems it solves? What's the time to value? How fast can you implement? How easily can you implement? Things you can stand in front of and stick by when you get into a commercial relationship with a new customer. And if you tell that story quickly and well and have a good story to tell, you're likely to get, your attention, my
Yeah,
attention,
of course.
about why, if that's a problem I got to solve, then I'm really kind of keen to listen if you got a great solution that can help me attend to something, because I don't really want to go and evaluate 14 different things or be pitched 14 different times. So I think it's things like that where we can really help these supply chain technology founders and CEOs kind of hone their story, get it in the right order, and really make it impactful for whomever they're speaking with.
Yeah, basically, tell me what you're trying to solve before you even start, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's it.
I fully agree with you. So now, take a step back. By now you've seen supply chains from three different perspectives, right? As an operator, as an advisor, and as a board member. How has changed you, Rick? How you think about risk, transformation, and capital allocation? Has it changed you?
Ooh, that's that's quite the question. Well, I've certainly become more aware as a board advisor and a strategic advisor, on top of my roots as an operator, about the importance of attending to risk. You know, I may have had a little bit of an advantage on that because I had a front row seat to the COVID-19 and our work with the White House Supply Chain Task Force and increasing wipe supply, and the numerous interviews and interrogations that I underwent as far as the Clorox Company went. So I kind of had a front row seat to that, but that really informed some things I thought about that helped us during hyperinflation, definitely helped us during the cyber attack, around how to be more resilient and how to really figure out what were your most important risks to attend to. So I think if anything, all this has served to kind of sharpen my focus on risk mitigation. And I tend to be a follow the money person,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna follow the money. I'm gonna follow the risk, and those that are most material. I think it's easier to say than it is to do, but really evaluating not only financial risk but reputational risk, regulatory risk, consumer risk. And now in the day of everybody is a journalist and everybody is a reporter, that becomes even more important as your products are in the marketplace and being purchased by consumers.
No, that's a fantastic perspective. Thank you for that. So we're converging towards the end, but before we wrap up, so I like to do a quick lightning round of questions with my guests. So short answers, a few words on each, and we'll just go through a handful of them just quickly. So one supply chain capability that companies continue to underinvest in from your perspective?
Um, Adaptive planning. I
Adaptive.
don't see nearly enough companies really working on improving their forecast. They've almost given up and said, well, we'll never get a better forecast, so why try? Let's just do the best we can. And there are tools and capabilities that will allow them to do that. I advise a company called KetaQ that has such a platform, and it's really incredible when you put artificial intelligence against something as hard as a demand forecast.
Absolutely, fully agree. So, one emerging technology you're watching closely?
Um, for me, I'm really interested in the in the procurement space, and
Uh-huh.
I'm going to be kind of general here, but I think there's so much ground to cover there. But with with primary suppliers, but also secondary and tertiary suppliers, there's a lack of visibility there, a lack of transparency on purpose in many cases. But I think we could all be better if we had more visibility and more real-time ability to kind of orchestrate what's going on the supply side.
In that, fully agree. So, one leadership trait that matters most during crisis, and you lived a few of those. So, which is
Ha,
one leadership skill that
wow.
you,
I only get to pick one.
two
Ah,
you want?
one leadership trait. Well, let me go with this. I think it's absolutely imperative that you're unflappable. That you're unflappable. The organization, and it can't be phony. It can't be, like everything is falling apart right outside your window, and you go, "Hey, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Everything's fine." It's got to be a realistic view of the world, but an unflappable um, induction of those details, so that you are clear-headed, you're thinking properly, you're thinking quickly, and you can make decisions in the moment. I find those are the most important and impactful things. That's a real leadership requirement.
I love that one. That's different, and I really love it. So, one last one. So, a piece of advice for the next generation supply chain leaders.
Well, I think the advice that I'm giving to a lot of individuals is to really plus up their digital fluency, whatever it takes. And just because I find, there is a little bit of generational to this, but I also find that just because someone grew up with a mobile phone in their hand doesn't mean they're necessarily digitally fluent as it relates to solving business problems and supply chain problems and marrying the right technology with the right problem. So I'd say if there's one thing to go do if you don't have it already is become digitally fluent.
I love that one. Fully agree. So one last question, not truly the last one. And I always like to close my conversations with a question that I'm asking everybody that comes through the chair you're sitting now. So throughout your career, from leading supply chains to now advising founders, CEOs, boards, you've seen leadership, technology, resiliency shape organizations. So the question, so what keeps your personal momentum going forward today? Is it a belief, a mindset, a principle, or even just a habit that continues to drive you to lead, learn, create impact?
Yeah, I'm a Luis, I'm a lifetime learner. I really enjoy learning and I enjoy contributing. And what gave me great pleasure during my working career is learning from the people I worked with and then contributing to help us all be successful. And that's true today with what I'm doing. I'm loving learning more about the technologies that I'm supporting with the really smart people that I'm working with, and then being able to give back in terms of things that I've experienced and things that I know that maybe they haven't come across just yet. So it's a pretty good combination.
I love it. I love it. So, Rick, this was a great conversation, a great way to end it. So, your perspective really from leading through historic disruption, helping shape the next generation supply chain innovation, it really captures how I see our industry, evolving today. So, I really thank you for joining us and helping keep the momentum flow going. Any final remarks you want to make?
Well, I would just like to thank you again, Luis, for inviting me. It's been really fun to have this conversation with you. And hey, maybe somewhere down the road we could do it again. I look forward to that.
I love it, for sure. So now to our audience, what stood out today for me is a really a simple but truly powerful idea, right? The future supply chain will not be defined by technology alone. It will be defined by organizations where talent and technology evolve together with change management. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with fellow operators, innovators, and leaders across the supply chain ecosystem. I'm Luis Solana, and this is the Momentum Flow, where clarity, capital, and conviction keep supply chains and leaders moving forward. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep the momentum flow going. Thank you.